Have you ever seen wolves battle for dominance? I mean, really go at it? The losing wolf does something really remarkable. It lies down on the ground and exposes its neck to the victor. The winning wolf will growl and snarl and walk around and make all kinds of noises, but it won't touch the losing wolf as long as it lays down. If it stands up, then they go at it again. See, with wolves, their culture, their society, and the tools that they use in their culture and society, their fangs, their claws, their strength, they've kind of evolved hand in hand so that the way they use their tools and the way they interact with each other in society doesn't lead to them hurting each other. The society evolves, but they use their tools in ethical ways because the evolution of their tools went hand in hand with the evolution of their culture. That's not true about us. We advance the use of our tools way faster than we do our culture. And that's where McLuhan comes in and says we shape our tools, and then our tools shape us. It's kind of like with cell phones now. The cell phone was not invented so that we could have proximity dating. You know, when you go downtown, you're going to meet your friend, and you say, well, where do you want to meet? Well, you say, well, I'll just meet you downtown, and then you get on a cell phone, and you say, okay, well, I'm about here. Oh, yeah, I see you. Hi, how are you? When I was a kid, I had to know, like, the date, the time, the place exactly, because we didn't have those cell phones. So we shape our tools, and then our tools shape our behavior. Unfortunately, some of those behaviors, because the tools have advanced so much more quickly than our culture, aren't always ethical. And that's unfortunate. You know, there's the cautionary tale of Stacey Snider. You may have heard of her. A teacher who... or she was going to be a teacher. She finished all her degree work, all her coursework down in Florida, and the university sees a picture of her on Facebook wearing a pirate hat and drinking out of a cup at a party. And they decide this is not the kind of impression that they want teachers, or this is not the persona that they want teachers to have in the real world when they're working with kids. And so they deny her her diploma. Of course, the case goes to court, etc., and you can look up more about this online, but it's just an example of, you know, how we use Facebook or other tools has not evolved at the same rate that our culture has evolved, and that's kind of an important piece of all these things. Now, does that mean that we shouldn't publish student work online? No, of course we should publish student work online. There's this wonderful story about this grade 5 class. Very quickly, they sing a song, the teacher videotapes them, puts it on their class blog and on YouTube, and it's Landslide by Stevie Nicks. And Stevie's tour manager sees the video on YouTube, shows it to Stevie. Long story short, the kids, grade 5 class, gets invited to Madison Square Gardens where they perform with Stevie Nicks. They've since performed with all kinds of performers from all over the world because of that one possibility, that one interaction. So putting ourselves online isn't a bad thing, but we've got to learn to be like the wolves. We've got to find a way so that we can evolve our ethical behavior, or we shouldn't be like McLuhan says. We shape our tools and then our tools shape us. Let us shape how we use our tools in ethical and responsible ways. There's a story that Lawrence Lessig tells about when he's traveling on a train in Russia with a visiting professor. And the two of them are talking on the train, just discussing things, and the professor turns to the young 20-something Lawrence Lessig and says, you know, we're far more well-informed about what's going on in the world here in Russia than you Americans ever will be. Which completely floors Lawrence. He says, in communist Russia, where your newspapers are filtered and edited and controlled about what you can learn and how you can learn it. How can you possibly say that you're more well informed when we have free open press in the United States? And the professor turns to him and says, you see, that's just the thing with you Americans. You think that when you read those newspapers that you're reading the truth. See, in Russia, we know they're lying to us. So we'll read 6, 7 different papers, and from that we'll try to distill the truth, what actually is going on. It's an interesting kind of observation. I mean, I think that's probably true about me in Canada, everyone, no matter where we are. I think we also need to learn to be Russian, circa 1980. Behind that is this notion of kind of triangulating information. I once received an email saying, congratulations, you've been nominated in the top 100 education blogs from the online educational database. Sounded like I got an award. Anyways, I did some digging and I kind of used all the tools that were available to me. I Googled the fellow's name. I took his website and I went to check it out at EasyWhois to see who owns that website. I went over to the Wayback Machine at archive.org and looked into the history. The kind of, content analysis that Alan November often talks about. And I discovered it was just this fellow who started up a website just a few months earlier, and he works in marketing, and he's trying to make a buck, really. And what he did was he linked to me and a bunch of other wonderful bloggers in the field of education. And I guess he was trying to build up some link status for himself. So I didn't win any award, but it was that triangulating of information, trying to go to many sources to figure out what was going on. I think that's kind of another piece of this puzzle. We need to learn to be like the wolves. We need to learn to be Russian. It's from Aesop's Fables. Maybe you've heard of it, The Bundle of Sticks. The story goes, in brief, very quick, there's an older man who's coming towards the end of his life, and he's worried about his 3 sons because they're constantly bickering, and they're just not getting along with each other. He's worried because when he goes, he's afraid that they won't be there to support each other. So he asks each of them to collect a stick and bring it to him, which they do. And then he takes the sticks and he ties them up in this bundle. And once they've done that, he says to the oldest, he said, take the bundle and crack it across your knee. Well, it's this big bundle of sticks. And he tries to crack it across his knee and he can't. And he goes, it's too heavy, it's too thick. Goes to the next brother, asks the same, and then the same of the third. And of course, nobody can break it. And he says to them, well, open the bundle and each of you remove one of the sticks, which they do. He says, now crack those over your leg, which they do easily. He says, now do you see what I mean? As long as you work together and support each other, you will be as unbreakable as the bundle of sticks. And I think there's a lesson in that story that relates to pedagogy, to how we teach. Getting kids to work together and not trying to defeat each other in terms of I want to get a better mark than you do. But how can we use these web-based tools so that kids are working not for grades, but for social credit, to be recognized by their peers as having done something cool so that they do something cool as well. That's the kind of collaboration, interdependence, I think, that leads to some really remarkable things happening in a classroom. There's this grade 6 teacher who starts her year every year the same way. The kids come into class the first day, and she says to them, what questions do you have about your world and about yourself? I just want you to write them down, make a list. And then one kid always asks, so, well, can I write like a silly question? Is that okay? And the teacher says, well, if it's a question you have about your world or about yourself, then that's not silly. Go ahead, anything you can think of. So the kids write up all these questions, and then they look at the lists and they say, okay, well, let's look at the questions you all have and see which ones fit together. And they kind of make these lists, and they say, well, these questions all go here, and these here, and these here. And they kind of make these lists. And then when they're all done, there's the math curriculum, there's the social studies curriculum, there's the science curriculum, there's the language arts curriculum. And they've kind of, now that's an incredible command of pedagogy that teacher has, because over the course of the rest of the year, as these kids work together and they get to reporting time, the kids ask, well, how are we going to get reported? Like, it's report card time. What's it going to be on? And then the teacher starts showing them the curriculum and says, well, you've learned this and this and this and this and this. And they say, really? We learned all that? Wow. I thought we were just having fun. Now, these 3 things that I've talked to you about. First, I talked to you about the wolves. Well, that story about the wolves, that's really a story about technology. That's about, being ethical and thoughtful in the way that we use technology. We can use these tools to cause harm, but if we're careful and thoughtful about it, we can use these tools to do a lot of good. The second story I told you about being Russian, well, that was really a story about content and how we approach working with content and triangulating content from many sources. And the third story, the bundle of six, well, that's really a story about pedagogy. That's kind of like our dream of how, it's my dream, I guess, of how I've always wanted to see things work out in my own class. Of course, all of that happens in some context. Each of us are unique in different areas, teaching different things, different grades, etc. But when you put it all together, that's the total package, what's known as the TPAC model of education. And teachers live in that intersection. A long time ago, I learned from